Tonight, Julia organizing and on track for Nicaragua and Central America. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for October 8th. Tropical storm Balita has been named in the Southwest Indian Ocean just an hour or so ago, and Tropical storm Julia is intensifying on approach to Nicaragua. And now it's October the 8th, and so far 72 storms have formed so far this year. The average is 92. We'll have to wait and see if there's any more storms to form. We'll have to wait and see on that, of course. In the Atlantic, it's day 130 of hurricane season over there. Tropical storm Julia is still intensifying right now up to 45 miles per hour sustained winds with a pressure of 99 millibars. Forecast to become a hurricane before making landfall in Nicaragua. Watches and warnings are in place there. In the Eastern Pacific, there's only one area of interest in place right now, which could form from the remnants of Julia, or the energy of it could split over Central America. We'll see on the model section here in a minute. And some of that energy could contribute to something over here in the Eastern Pacific. In the Western Pacific, there's 3 areas of interest. Both of those 2% areas of interest are mainly towards the end of that 5-day period into 20 days to day 7 for formation chances. But that 20% area of interest, that is 96W chances dropping on that one in the Western Pacific. Central the Southern Hemisphere, we've had Tropical storm Balita named and could briefly intensify just a tad before weakening, and that will ultimately die off as we head into next week. Short-lived off-season storm yet again here in the Southern Hemisphere. So this is some imagery that I had earlier of Julia. Of course, it's looking better organized now, but it is organizing as it does approach the coast of Nicaragua. Now that it is ended its land interaction with Southern America, it should gain some more intensity. Of course, it's targeted to 45 miles per hour sustained winds per recon, and I imagine that intensification trend will continue over the next few days, or 2 days, or really 36 hours that it has left over water before it hits land. Having a look at that imagery, the Atlantic is extremely calm, other than Julia, of course. You can see in Julia's forecast cone, those red lines on the coast of Nicaragua, that is our hurricane warning in place. Those darker blues are tropical storm warnings, and those lighter blues for the coast of Honduras for the north, those are our tropical storm watches in place right now. In the Eastern Pacific, you can see the remnants of Paine still spinning off there. I don't know if that large swirly mass to the southwest of Paine is the remnants of what was Norbert. It might be. I'll have to wait and see on that. But Eastern Pacific, pretty quiet here as far as things go. In the Western Pacific, you can see 96W there to the north of Guam, really devoid of any thunderstorm activity. But that's going to continue to move off towards the west, and models are more so catching onto this behind 96W. That would ultimately could have a higher chance at forming. Of course, we're agreeing at 10% right now. Chances will likely rise over the next few days as that formation area is likely going to extend further west. In the Indian Ocean, usual monsoonal pattern here. Just your typical thunderstorms blowing up a lot of activity in the Bay of Bengal, as well as over western India. I imagine this is pretty standard for this time of year over there. And in the Southern Hemisphere, here is Balita, looking decent for an off-season storm. I mean, we've already had 3, 4, depends on who you ask. Of course, this is quite rare. I can't recall the time that we've ever seen 3 systems before the start of the Southern Hemisphere season, but this shows just how favorable it is down here in the Southern Hemisphere. Having a look at the sea temperatures right now, Eastern Pacific still pretty favorable for some development. Of course, the Eastern Pacific may still have a few storms left in it before the season ends. Same can be said for the Atlantic. Caribbean Sea, Gulf of Mexico, Western Atlantic into the Bahamas, pretty warm. Main development region tempering off a little bit in the latest days, but still pretty favorable for tropical cyclone development over there in the Atlantic basin. Still well above average as well, really across the board here in the Atlantic. In the North Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, still piping hot here. Second peak of the North Indian Ocean cyclone season coming up pretty soon. Moving into the Western Pacific, look at how much water is over there in the Western Pacific right now, boiling hot. So maybe some intense typhoons will be on the way. I know that a lot of people are looking at this late season time for maybe some intense typhoons. Maybe that could be on the way. We'll have to wait and see on that. But certainly sea temperatures are more than favorable for a very strong storm over there in the Philippine Sea and in the Western Pacific and into the South China Sea. Just look at the season temperature anomaly here. Western Pacific, Philippine Sea, we're above average across the board. Same can be said in the Atlantic. You can see a little bit of a cold pool there off of southwestern Florida in the wake of Ian, and maybe some little cold pool off western Mexico from Orlean. But other than that, La Nina is still persisting. But other than that, no other cold pools that I can see there. Ocean heat content really limited to the Western Caribbean. Ian didn't really impact it that much actually, but where our current tropical storm is going to be moving over very low ocean heat content over there in the Western Pacific, tapering off a little bit. That is pretty normal for this time of year, of course, over there in the Western Pacific, but still pretty favorable ocean heat content given those warm sea surface temperatures. More than enough for a strong storm to take advantage of. So I'm going to look at the commuter models here. You can see the 18Z GFS briefly makes Julia into a hurricane before landfall. Maybe a little bit farther south than what the National Hurricane Center has forecasted landfall. We'll have to wait and see on that though, but you can see there towards the end of the forecast period, some of its energy might go on to contribute to a tropical cyclone in both the Eastern Pacific and maybe the Bay of Campeche. We'll have to wait and see on that. That's very low confidence right now. But what we can say is Julia is going to move into Central America probably as a low to mid Category 1 hurricane. Looking at the rainfall threat, all of those red areas are 10 inches or higher of rainfall, mainly being in those coastal areas, but I don't want to underestimate the fact that inland areas are going to get a significant amount of rainfall, which could lead to some flash flooding issues, landslides, mudslides. Those inland areas are not out of this flooding threat from Julia at all. They're also going to get strong winds, as well as some gusty conditions, and even some coastal areas are going to get some rough surf from Julia as well. So there's a lot of threats coming here with Julia to Central America. Looking at the longer ranges up to 240 hours out in the Western Pacific, I have absolutely no clue what the GFS is doing here. There you can see quite clearly our system behind 96W, diving towards the south and then sort of moving slowly and then off towards the west near Luzon. Kind of reminds me of Hinamnor a little bit earlier on in the season, and then you can see something happening out there in the deep tropics. We'll have to wait and see on that, what actually ends up happening here in the Western Pacific, but quite peculiar that the GFS is showing this on its usual antics, I guess. Here in the Eastern Pacific and the Western Atlantic, you can see those brief low-level circulations of both of those systems, as per usual. This far out for these two systems is pretty low confidence, and it can be said for those West Pacific systems. So things are subject to change, but it's just what we've been presented with the model runs, of course. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when Julia makes landfall in Central America. Where does the energy go? We'll have to wait and see on that. As per usual, you can visit our merch store for a lot of things. You can scan that QR code. We have a lot of things on offer. Of course, Nathan, they're wearing a very fancy t-shirt. Go ahead and throw that pillow at me, Nathan. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Well, here we go. Silly range. GFS predicting that typhoon, which you saw towards the end of the 240-hour range, capitulates in the South China Sea. Something moving up towards Bangladesh there even. And maybe a typhoon persisting out there in the deep tropical of the Western Pacific, maybe getting up towards Category 2, Category 3 intensity. Maybe. We'll have to wait and see on that, of course. But really, this is just the usual 18Z GFS, quite frankly, out here in the Western Pacific. Very low confidence. Wouldn't be surprised if none of this happens at all. Although we'll have to wait and see on that. Times can change. We'll have to wait and see. So, for on this day, we had Tropical Storm Hudhud had just formed in the Bay of Bengal, and would go on to make a Category 4 landfall in India. Vongfong was peaking as a powerful Category 5 typhoon in the Western Pacific, and Simon was dissipating as it moved into the Baja California Peninsula. Nothing else was active on this day in 2014, although I believe the invest that would become Faye and Gonzalo was active on this day in the Atlantic, and of course both would go on to affect Bermuda. Faye as a hurricane, Gonzalo as a major hurricane back in 2014. I guess it's naming list time. So the next naming list in the Atlantic, now that Julia has formed, will be Carl, followed by Lisa. In the Eastern Pacific, crazy season over there if you ask me. Roslyn is next up on the naming list, followed by Seymour. Back in 2016, I remember Seymour quite well, tracking that one, Category 4 at peak. In the Western Pacific, Sanka could be right around the corner. Many of these areas of interest. Nisat would be the next name after that one. Sitrang would be the next up in the Indian Ocean. When that one forms, it probably will in the coming months, as the second peak is on the way. And in the Southern Hemisphere, a remarkable start to the Southwest Indian Ocean. Chineso is next on the naming list, followed by Dingani. In the Australian region, Darien is up next, and in the South Pacific, it's Hale. We'll have another Tropical Weather Bulletin covering the latest on Julia and Balita tomorrow night.